Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar of today with Amitai, Schleier, Behavior-Driven Development for Everyone. On behalf of the Toronto Agile community, I am Ardita Karai, and I want to thank also our volunteers, Paul Henman and Peter Jake, for helping me to set up this webinar for you today. Just a little bit of what's going on. So welcome, introducing Amitai, then presentation, some follow-up questions, and then closing. Make sure that the questions, we want to see questions as we go. Don't wait for the end. Especially today, Amitai wants a very interactive session as much as we can. So feel free to start putting your questions on the question box. That is the only way that we're going to communicate, by you typing the questions and me monitoring and then passing along to Amitai when he gets a chance in between presentation.
So Ardita did the kindness of introducing me and explaining what we're doing today. I will zoom through that a little bit, and the purpose of today is for you to see a little bit of what BDD might look like in practice. So I want to approximate that with as much of the time as we have, even though this is not going to be as interactive as us being together, where we could bounce ideas back and forth with low latency and high bandwidth. We can approximate what that might look like if we had already done that, and now we're trying to put it into code. So I'm going to show you a tool, Cucumber, that reflects what BDD might look like in practice. And if my slides will advance, then I'll really be doing well. All the technical difficulties. Let's try it this way. Okay. Here we go. Goals for this webinar. You've heard a lot about BDD. We're going to talk briefly about what it is not, because there are a lot of things that are like it, but it's a very particular idea. And again, the most thing we're going to spend time on is me showing you in a programming window in the terminal what BDD with the Cucumber tool looks like. And then something as a parting thought, and maybe for us to think about more later, is now that you've seen what BDD could look like, an approximation of it, what good might it do in your environment, in your context? That's what we're here for today. Like Artie said, put questions in the chat anytime. We're going to stop every so often and field at least one of them, so that it's not just me programming and talking out loud for 45 minutes. And hopefully we bounce back and forth between things you see me doing and maybe a clarification that I can make about it because you asked. So I hope that you will. So what is not BDD? It's not basically the same as test-driven development. They have a lot in common. It's sort of the same idea at a different scale. So if you know what TDD looks like, you have a clue what BDD might look like as well, but they're not the same. They're complementary. BDD, for the same reason, TDD is something that developers go do amongst themselves, and nobody else really sees it. They just see the benefit or they don't. But BDD is not like that. BDD is something that we do together. You're going to see me today using Cucumber, which is a software tool that helps us automate some of the discussions that we have. But you don't need that. That's just that's a way to enact the behavior-driven development that we've already done together. What BDD is, like I said, is everybody's doing it together. And we're focused not so much on the details of how the code is going to work, or even the architecture, but on what we need the system to do. In a given context, you'll see the language given, when, then. You may have seen it before. That's the ubiquitous language that Cucumber, the tool, provides. The language is called Gherkin. It's a series of puns all the way down. And so this shared language is what lets us, whether we are a developer or a tester or a product owner or a business analyst or a customer or God knows who, gives us a shared language to talk about the behavior of the system as a whole, which is what we're interested in. TDD is complementary to that. You could do big cycles of BDD and small cycles of TDD, and several TDD tests could add up to give you one BDD feature, for example. Again, you don't have to use Cucumber. You don't have to automate anything. But the idea is that we do it together, we focus on system behavior, and we have words that we all understand together. So what? Well, if we can put BDD to use for us in our context to get our work done more effectively, then it could be very important. If it doesn't seem like it's going to help us with that, then it's not important at all. That's my opinion. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's yours too. So maybe today you'll see why it would or wouldn't be important to you. Do you have to be a great programmer or have a great programmer or programmers on your team in order to do BDD? The answer is no, and I can prove it to you. I'm going to do the programming today. That should be a good proof, especially in front of a crowd like this. So to the extent that I understand BDD, it's that I've learned it by doing, and I've learned it by collaborating, and I've watched people that seem to know what they're doing better and try to figure out what they're doing differently from what I'm doing. So I'm still on my journey. Don't look to me as the master. If you want to talk to some people who are, I'll gladly refer you to them. But the point of this, though, is that you may have everything you need on your team to start doing BDD today if you think it would be good. What really helps, in my experience, is when you have people who are animated by doing work that matters. It's valuable to them, meaningful to them, to do work that is going to benefit somebody, that we can even see what the benefit will be. We'll get a chance to see their face when we do a good job or when we don't, and we can understand the impact of what we're trying to accomplish. If we don't have that, BDD is less important, in my opinion. It also works better, since we're going to work together, when we have people who know what they don't know and know when they need to learn more and are willing to share what they know with others, which is what I'm trying to do today, and willing to learn from others when they have something to offer, which is also what I'm trying to do today. So those are, I think, character traits of the people on your team that really make a difference in whether BDD will help you. But being a great programmer is not required. That's a lot of words. Here's sort of a rephrasing of them. But let's skip that, because what would really help, since BDD itself relies on examples, it consists of examples, then maybe I should explain it with examples. One thing we won't do today, that we would do if this were an in-person interactive kind of a workshop, is Three Amigos. I would split you up as an audience into product owners, testers, and developers. Ideally, you would join a group that you're not normally part of, so that it's a role you're not familiar with, and you would actually help me solve the programming problem that I'm trying to solve in the guise of the roles that you're playing. And so we're not going to do that today, but that is maybe the key part of BDD. It's not Cucumber that makes it BDD. It's these conversations that makes it BDD. We can't do that today, so that's why this is an approximation of BDD that I'm showing you. So let's pretend that we've already come to the agreement that we would have to discuss amongst ourselves to come to, and I have the example scenarios for the feature that we want. The programming problem for today is bowling in the US style, 10-pin bowling. I understand that New England in the US has a different variety. I understand that Canada has a 5-pin bowling game. I barely understand the US 10-pin bowling game where I'm from, so I will do my best to make that work. This is based on Bob Martin's bowling kata. You've probably heard of it if you're familiar with katas or Bob Martin. It's a standard kind of approach to move through getting a computer to keep score for a bowling game for one player. And so it illustrates, his version of it is for test-driven development. I've adapted it for behavior-driven development, which will look very similar, except it will be using Cucumber as the tool for the test. So let's take a quick pause here. I've sort of skimmed a lot of stuff. Has anybody asked any questions that we should field before I jump into the code? Okay, and we'll move on. So we're going to use behavior-driven development, approximated, using a tool called Cucumber with some stories that I already have handy to keep track of the score of a bowling game. And we're going to do it over here in terminal land, because that's where I live.
Amitai,
so what I have here, yes.
There is one question Ingrid has. What are the benefits
That is a fine question. The benefits can include, they can include anywhere from none, actually, from a waste of time, and you shouldn't have spent time on it, all the way up to none, all the way up to much less waste, because a shared understanding happened a lot earlier. And it can include, when you go as far as this kind of automated acceptance test, can go as far as reducing a lot of surprises in production. As you change the code, a bunch of behaviors that you've expected before are very unlikely to stop being true because you have an automated acceptance test suite. So it can be, it's a thing that's harder to account for than, for example, break fix. Break fix, you see the cost, you see, you know, the run rate to get it fixed. With something like BDD, you reduce the failure rate. You reduce the amount of time you spend delivering things that turned out not to matter or that turned out to be misunderstood. You get a lot of the understanding earlier, and in theory and in practice, there can be a lot of business benefit to that. Excellent question. Okay, so I have here an almost empty folder. It only contains one directory called T, where I've set up a little bit of boilerplate. I'll show you what's there. This is the, oh yeah, I should tell you what I'm doing. We're going to use the programming language Perl today to sort of make a didactic point, and that is that when we are working together with behavior-driven development, whether or not we use Cucumber, it's not important that everybody understand the code. That's still the developer's job. What's important is that everybody understand the shared language about the features and the behavior that we're after. And so Perl is sort of an extreme case of a programming language that is hard to understand, and so that it's intended to drive the point home that it's not important whether you understand it. So this is a little bit of Perl. It's just enough glue to run the Perl implementation of Cucumber. So we could try that with Perl's prove command, and it would say there were no tests. And so that's probably red, and it turned it red, and that's true. So what we're going to do is, because this is driven by behavior, we're going to come up with a behavior, and then we're going to make that be a real test, and then we're going to make a pass. So there's actually three parts to this story. And we're going to need a directory called features, which is where Cucumber looks for stuff. Oops. As you can see. And in it, we're going to need a directory called step definition, which is where Cucumber is going to map the shared language onto a real code. And then I'm going to make a little bin directory where I put the actual program. And in here, we're going to work with, from left to right, the feature of keeping score of a bowling game we'll put in this file. And in the middle, we'll have the step definition. And it doesn't really matter, it's just for our understanding. And then finally, on the right of the three, we'll have the game, the program. So here we are. Not much going on here. What would be useful to see first is when we try to run prove again that it did try to do something instead of saying that there were no tests. Let's see if we can get there. But first things first, what I have is a feature. The feature is compute bowling score. If I were to put this into Connextro story form, I would maybe say, as a very, cannot emphasize that enough, amateur bowler, I want the score to be computed for me so that all I need to do is pretend I'm aiming. Wish I could do more than that, but I can't. And let's put a scenario. This is going to consist of some scenarios. This is the feature. So the first scenario for computing a bowling score, and again, this is following Uncle Bob's slicing of the story, is what if we just rolled a gutter ball 20 times? That should be a pretty easy case, and that would make some of our objects exist, and that would give us an easy scenario to get passing. We feel better about ourselves. The ball is rolling, so to speak. So let's say we have a scenario called gutter game. So far, this is Gherkin on the left. This is going to be fed into the Cucumber tool, and as you can see, it is comprehensible. This is the shared language of BDD. So again, this is going to look like a given, a when, and a then. Given, let's say, a new game, when when I knock down 0 pins, 20, whoops, puns is also a risk here, but not today, 20 times, then, exactly, then my score is 0. This is the gutter game scenario. Does this make sense? So if we're starting a new game, and then I roll 20 times, and each time it's a 0, then the total at the end should be 0. So what happens if we run Cucumber now? That is oddly green. So this is an important feature of any test that you write, whether it's BDD, TDD, or test after, and that's, can it fail? Have you seen it fail? Because if you haven't, then you shouldn't be trusting it to tell you the truth about when it succeeds. So far this kind of magically passes. There's a different way to run the test that probably shows the failure, but mainly let's get it to actually fail. So something we would need to do to tie it into actual code is over here in what's called the step definitions. This is the Cucumber magic. On the left you write English. In the middle you write the language of the implementation of the code that maps the English onto the code. So this is actually kind of the trickiest part, but once you get it working, you often don't need to touch it. So this is the step definitions, it's called. And I'm going to say things that I always say in Perl just to help you make fewer mistakes. We have to bring in part of Cucumber's module, and then we want to use some basic Perl testing functions, which are here. And now I'm going to say, this is kind of a test in a way. I'm going to say, I bet it's fine if I include a program called that. And this will fail if there isn't one. In fact, you can see I have the warning set up. There already is one, and so it's giving me a marker on the left side here. But this is kind of a test that I'm going to include the code that I wish existed. And you can see on the right side, it doesn't exist yet. So this should be a little bit red. Let's see if that's red enough to be red now. Yeah, okay. It's painting a little funny, but tried to include bin game.pl, can't locate it, failed one test of 4, red. Good. Okay, so this is starting to be meaningful. We know that these pieces are vaguely connected to each other. Now let's do a little bit.
For the right reason. Now
That's right,
exactly. For the right reason.
Exactly. So I have this given when and then, and in here in the step definition, I have to. It's my job as the programmer handling some Cucumber cases. It's my job to handle all of the natural language. As you can see here, a new game, I knock down some pins sometimes, my score is something, something. And so the way that looks in the Perl implementation of Cucumber, which may be different from Ruby or Java or what have you, but is vaguely similar, is given, and then this regular expression quote operator, the beginning of an entire string, a new game, end of string, which should match exactly that, or else not match. Then I want to run this subroutine, which says, I think this is the trick. Yeah, that's right. So there's a stash, which is like the context of the running Cucumber test, and in Perl's Cucumber it's called S. And you can put any kind of thing you want on it. It's an associative array or hash or dictionary or whatever you might call it in your language. And so I just want to make a new one. I want to be able to say game new. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not able to do that because there's no game class and there's no constructor called new. And this should be read for a different reason if we were to get that far, which we won't yet because we still don't have bin game.pl. So let's do that. Go over here and start to make the real code exist. This is the code that we're actually trying to test into existence. So same idea here. We use a Perl interpreter. Don't make the stupidest possible mistakes, just the slightly clever ones. And we want to be in a package called game, I guess I would say, like a namespace, if you're familiar with that in other languages. And nothing said we had to have a constructor yet except for that first given. So this should feel better. We should be able to succeed, especially in Perl if I do that at the end. Line 10 here that had given us that error should succeed now, and we should get further. We should get some complaints from further on. That's right. So we were able to load the file. We don't see that error anymore. It's a lot of noise, I understand that, but we're seeing test compiled fails, and that's because it tried to call new on a game, and it can't find a method called new, which is true. I made a thing called game, and I didn't give it a method called new. So maybe now's a good time to make a very simple method called new. Oops. That is not going to help me about 2 steps from now, but it might help me immediately. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, okay. So again, yeah.
But it's just like adding that new is just the enough you have to do to pass the test for now, right?
Exactly. So I could, and you may have seen development like this before, I could do a lot more design and think about the objects I'm going to need and the methods and the interfaces and how they're going to fit together. And then, you know, when I feel like I have a pretty good picture on the whiteboard, then make that code exist and then see what's wrong with it. It's kind of the opposite of test-driven, and so it's also kind of the opposite of behavior-driven. So what I'm doing here is really on the other end of the spectrum. It's maybe a little bit too lazy. You know, we didn't even talk about what bowling is like. We said that there's, we're going to roll the ball and we're going to get a score. But there are other objects in the domain we might want to have exist that we haven't even talked about, like maybe a roll is an object, maybe a frame is an object, besides the game being an object. All these things could be needed, and I haven't thought about them at all. Now, if this was a more complicated problem or I hadn't seen it before, maybe I would want to think about it more at the beginning. But the idea with TDD and with BDD is what's enough to get moving, and then, you know, as we define things that we need, let's make them exist. And it's okay to work this way because we're going to build up a set of tests for things that we already have expected to work. And if anything that we've already expected stops being true, we're going to hear about it immediately. So we're not taking a risk. And that's why I'm willing to be as lazy as I am.
Is something that we hear often, right? Emerging design, is that something like this?
Yeah, and the design doesn't emerge by itself. So at some point, I'm going to have to be a little less lazy and sort of look at the state of what I've written and decide that I don't love, you know, I see that it works, but I don't love how it works. And since I have tests, that's a great time to look for a refactoring and see if the test still passed. And if the test still passed and I feel better about it, then we're in really good shape.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the design moves.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. So we were at a kind of a green, not a super meaningful green, because we haven't actually written anything that knocks down pins or does it a number of times or even gets a score. These are simply not being called. And if we were to run it, I think with the alternate tool Firkin, which is derived from Gherkin, yeah, we would see the colors may be a little bit hard to discern, but this is greenish because it has a corresponding step definition. And this is, I don't know, orangey brown, because there aren't even corresponding step definitions. And so what Cucumber does in that case is kind of indeterminate. You can configure that should be red, or you can configure that should be ignored. So far it's being ignored, but we can tell that, so it's kind of safe. So let's move on to making the win and then do something. That would be cool. So we have the given being matched. This one's going to be slightly more interesting when, and this is going to be a regular expression, which is its own form of tricky programming, Perl or otherwise. When I'm looking for a number, anything from 0 to 9, more than once or more, not 0 times, and then the word pin, and then I'm going about a step ahead here, but you can imagine if I ever knock down more than 0 pins, it's going to be 1 pin. So I want to look at 0 or 1 occurrences of the letter S for my language matching here. So I'm matching from down. 0 should match a number once or more. Pin with an S or not should match pins. Keep going. And then the same idea, a number once or more. So 20 is a 2 and a 0, that should match. And then again, time and an S, 0 or 1 times. And then end of the string. So I'm not anchoring to the beginning of the string this time, but I am still anchoring to the end, it's a $sign. This is just regular expressions. It's horrendous. If I didn't write this, I wouldn't be able to read it. That's why you get it right once and test it. So for the when of this format, when it says down something pin something times, this is a little more interesting. I can now say I've captured in these parentheses. That's kind of a variable, right? I could say some different number, and in the next scenario I probably will. So I want to capture it. I want to say my pins is the first capture, something pins, and my times is the second capture, second one there. And then just being really simplistic here, we're going to loop over however many rolls there are in the game. So let's say from 1 to the number of times that you said you did it. Then make roll 1 bigger and go back around. That's a for loop. And each time we get through for each roll, on this game object that we made when we set a new game, let's say that there is a method called roll, and it takes the number of pins. And we're calling it. So each time we have a roll, we call that. And God knows what the code will do with it, but it makes sense that we should be able to say roll when we roll. So what happens now? Well, my theory is we don't have a method called roll. We should get an error about that. That's what I think. Yeah. So this may seem really, I don't know, simplistic or childish or almost dumb, but I find it really useful in TDD or BDD to make sure that I have a hypothesis about what's going to happen next. Because when it starts being wrong is when I've lost the thread on cause and effect, which is why I'm working in these small steps. So it's not just, you know, mindlessly go through the steps of running a test and seeing if it's red or green. I have an expectation based on what I've done so far and what I think is going on in my head that I want to see whether I've got it right or not. And if it's wrong, I'm glad I had that test to tell me so that I can adjust before I went too far. So in this case, I wasn't wrong, which is a thing that happens sometimes. And what I want to do about it is, again, pretty simplistic. I want to make the simplest possible method so that it will give me at least a different error message and maybe a green bar. Okay. Can't call, oh yeah, okay. Remember I said 2 steps ago, I probably wasn't doing myself any favors. So we do have a method roll, but we can't call it on something that isn't an object. I didn't do a good enough job in my constructor. So now I need to make new do what Perl methods called new do. So this is a lot of boilerplate. But our object will be a reference to a hash, which is like a dictionary in Python or an associative array in other languages. Really common data structure in Perl. And I'm going to do the Perl-y thing that turns it into an object, which is to bless it into the class that it belongs. This is all voodoo. I never remember how this works unless I've been writing a lot of Perl. So I practiced this a little bit beforehand. Okay, so now this should be a new that gives us something back, which it didn't before, in which case we should be able to call roll, even though it won't do much because it will be on something that is an object. Not as bad. Okay, still not that good, but not as bad. So onward, let's see if we can check the score. This is where we'll do, maybe you've heard given when then, maybe you've heard arrange, act, assert. It's the same idea. So we've done an arrange, we've made a game object. We've done an act, which is to do some number of rolls and get into a state. And now we're at the assert phase, where we want to see if what we have is what we expected to have. So once again, we have to make a mapping in the step definitions to make the English in the Gherkin file go somewhere. So we're going to say then, and again with a regular expression, score is, and it's going to look really similar, same idea, some number, at least 1 digit, and that's the end of the string. So when that is true, then we want to do my expected score is that thing that we just captured, the number that we had here. So in this case, the expected score is 0. And my actual score is what happens if we go to our game object where we did all the rolling and we ask it for a score. And then so far this isn't an assertion yet. This is just getting the information that we want. An assertion would be in Perl, for example, that the two compare equal expected score double equals actual score. Oops. Now we have an assertion. And again, I have a hypothesis, which is that I just made up this method called score, so that should be the error that we get when we try to run it. Yeah, no object method called score. That's easy. Easy to do a bad job anyway. So this should fail differently. It's green, but also there's a warning, which is that there's an uninitialized value in that comparison. So let's make that warning go away. And remember, the point of the score is to give us a number. So I don't know. I feel like 0 is a good one. I don't know why I think that. Cool. So no more warning, and now we actually compute the first case correctly. Just for giggles, if I return a different number, like 15, here's what that would look like. If we computed the score and we did it wrong, it would look like this. Got 0, expected 15. So this is a little backwards. That reminds me that Perl wants me to put actual and then expected. It doesn't matter for the correctness, but it matters for how a human interprets the test result. This would make more sense. Let's try that one more time. Right, according to the test, what we expected was 0, and what we actually got from the code was 15. That makes more sense to me, so I'll keep it that way. And then if I put it back, I should be happier. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any questions, Arden?
Yeah, we are a little bit over half our time, but a question from Anne is, aren't you doing the coding before the user scenario is written? What are you coding against? The scenario.
I am assuming. Yeah. I think the question, if I'm understanding it correctly, is how do I know that this is the scenario that we want? Is that right? Or did I just make this up?
Probably, and can give us more. But probably
okay, so
that's
assuming that's the question. Assuming that's the question, then I'm assuming for purposes of this demonstration, because again, what you're looking at is not BDD. You're looking at the programmer using a tool called Cucumber to implement scenarios that have already been agreed upon. The discussions in 3 Amigos have already happened, and this is the first one we agreed on. So I hope that answers the question. If we were really doing BDD, we would have that discussion now together, and then when we agreed, I would implement it. But I'm assuming since we only have 20 more minutes that we already had that discussion, and that's where I got this from. Hopefully that's the question.
Yeah, we had that discussion yesterday when we prepared for this.
That's right, exactly. It really did happen. So we have one scenario, and again, just to prove that these things are connected to each other, if I were to say, if I knock down one pin 20 times, that should throw things off too, maybe. Except, I don't think it will right now, because when we roll, we don't do anything with it, and the score is still going to be 0 because we always return 0. So this is an example of something we could change that should have an effect but doesn't yet. This will still be green, even though that's weird. So just keep that in your head. Or if I said that my score, we made the test fail by changing this number from 0 to 15 and back, we can also make the test fail for the same reason by saying, 22 over here. And that should be just as failure. So you can see that these things are starting to be glued together. That's the function of the code in the middle. And in fact, I don't believe we need to look at the code in the middle anymore because I don't think it's going to change anymore. So I'm going to hide it, and we can focus on our scenarios and our code. So next scenario, almost is not great, is what if I got a 1 every single time? So again, given a new game, which will make a new object, when I knock down one pin, and this is why I have that fancy regular expression to handle the natural language here, also 20 times, then my score is 20. And I'm pretty sure already that this is going to be red because score always says 0. So let's see. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I expected 20 because my gherkin said that, and I got 0 because my code said that. So, gosh, I think I have to strap my brain on a little bit for a minute, regrettably. what could I do? I could have something that I'm keeping track of the score on my self object. Let's call it total. We can initialize it to 0. And then when I roll, which is an object method, then we can pass it a value of pins, which we've already been doing. And we can say that the total is the total plus however many pins we just hit. And then when I ask for the score, instead of saying 0, I'll ask for the total. See what I did there? So I'm actually making roll do something, which is keep a running total of how many pins I've hit so far. Every time I call roll with some pins, I add that onto the total. When I ask for the score, whoops, I got to do something here too. Then report whatever the running total is now. So this, I think, will be green. And it is. If I made some kind of mistake, let's say started the running total with -1, I would hope that that would throw things off. And it does. Both of them, actually. So instead of 0, I got -1. Instead of 20, I got 19. It makes sense in retrospect. Again, if I didn't initialize it at all, maybe it would default to 0 or not. We could find out by running the test. But so this is pretty simplistic. This is the linear version of bowling where you never do a good job in any particular frame, which might be all I need, actually. But let's see what would happen when things get even more interesting. Again, I'm following the steps as sliced by Uncle Bob for his TDD exercise, the bowling kata. We did the exact same test in the exact same order. So what if we got one spare? And the way that he has us do this is given a new game. When I knock down 5 pins one time, and this is a little more Gherkin, and I knock down 5 pins one time, so that's going to be 10 pins in one frame. And we keep going, and I knock down 3 pins one time, and I knock down 0 pins 17 times. That should be 17, 18, 19, 20, still good, times. The test wouldn't care, but humans would if I didn't have that S there. Then my score is not 13. You would think 13 if it was just the linear 5 plus 5 plus 3 plus 0 is 13. But this is a spare, and it's a little bit different. I'm trying to construct from my brain. The score is actually supposed to be 16, and the reason for that is when you get a spare, then the next roll is counted twice, something like that. I'm sure you in the audience know better than I do.
So these are the rules that come from the business, right?
That's right. It doesn't matter whether I understand. They said it's 16, and if they gave me a few more examples, I could be sure that I had the right rule. But in this case, it's this one. So I bet what's going to happen, as usual, is my code is just doing the plus and the plus and plus, so it's going to say 13, and we're going to have a red test. Yeah, and we do. So the code actually says 13, and now what I'm wishing that it didn't say is 16. Well, gosh, I wish I had a brain. What if it seems like, yeah, it seems like my simplistic model here, where every roll I just take the number of pins and throw it on the total, is not going to work anymore. I might need something more like I keep track of all the rolls, because there's some state here, right? So like the fact that this is a 3 depends, how I score this depends on what happened before it. And so maybe I should just keep track of all the rolls that I get and make the roll method not do any math, just store the roll, and then make the score method do all the math and tell me what my score is so far. So I'm going to do some refactoring, but to make sure that it's refactoring, I need to be green first. So remember, right now we are red. So to be green, a little artificially, just going to comment this thing out. And that means when I refactor, I can be checking against whether all the things that used to work still work. And when they do, and I feel like I have another shot at the new story, I can try it again. So let's see, are we green? We are. Make it actually look green. Yep. So now we are safe to refactor. We have our two scenarios that we've already had. I think what I want to do instead is in my class, in the game class, instead of keeping the total, I want to keep all roles, and that's going to be a reference to an array, a list of values. It should be something like 20 or 21 possible values. And I also want to keep maybe the current role, and we'll call that 0 to begin with. And now my class has an array on it called all roles and a single value called current role. And this should pass the two tests the same as it did before. No change there. Cool. I think also then when I roll, instead of adding onto a total, which I'm not keeping anymore, that's interesting, it must have defaulted to 0. Let's put that back. I'm surprised that it passed because I didn't explicitly say this, and this code is still using it. So let's make it explicit and then remove it when we're done. Good, I feel better about that. So in roll, instead of updating the total, I think what I want to do is just track this roll at the end of my list of roles. So I want to say in Perl parlance, push puts a value on the end of an array. All roles, however many things that was. Right? And then in score, instead of asking for the total, maybe do a for loop or something. So for my roll starting at 1, roll is less than or equal to 21, I think is what its maximum is. Roll plus plus. I don't want to do that. And I want to have a local variable, which looks awfully similar. And I want to say total plus equals self, and dereference. See, Perl is really hard to understand even as you're writing it, so it's a great example for why you don't need to understand it. I need to dereference the array reference, and I need to take, no, I don't in this case. I just need to take the roll minus 1 thing off of it. I think that's right. And then return that total. Let's see what that has. I'm not even sure what to expect. Okay, it's close. I have an initialized value on my 31. Not sure how. In addition, I'm looking in the right place. It's bin.game.pl on 31. Anyone see my mistake?
What is the message under the 20? Under the green line.
Line 32 here.
No way around.
Taking the total and adding the roll minus 1. Let's be more programmy here. Maybe that helps. I don't really understand this mistake. This is why I write tests first, because when I don't understand, I find out pretty soon. Okay, this is somehow better. Oh yeah, I meant to do this also. Maybe it's not better anymore. Yeah. Okay, well, it's just a warning. So maybe we could get away with finishing the refactoring and we'll figure it out later. We're just not keeping a running total anymore. Yeah, line 28 it says now, which is right here. I cannot figure out how it would ever be an uninitialized value. It is. Perl, good stuff. Okay, so now maybe we have a way to deal with a spare. So let's try that real quick before we wrap up.
So this is the part where developers do something that business analysts or product owners don't need to understand, right?
Right, why does it take so long? Well, because I don't understand what's wrong with it. Do you understand what's wrong with it? Nope, nobody understands what's wrong with it. We've got to figure it out. So it may be working by accident right now. I'm not sure. So I'm happy that I have some tests in case it stops being true. So this should get us back to red, because I didn't actually change any logic yet. I still have this problem of 13 and 16. So what if, programming, what if I said we had a way to tell whether something was a spare or not? I don't think we're going to get there in a few minutes.
Probably not. Do you want to just talk about it? How would you take it?
Yeah, I think what's happening now, so I did a good thing, which is that I'm keeping track of all the roles. I'm not doing anything with the current role yet, but I think that I would want to look at what the current role is and what the previous roles are. Maybe this is where I need the concept of a frame, actually, because what makes the magic happen in the case of a spare is that something happened in the frame before. And so maybe instead of going over all the possible individual separate roles that I can make, I instead want to go over the frames and then look at these two roles, and then maybe the role afterward. Yeah, in fact, that makes sense to me. So now that let's say we call score at the end of the game. That's when we call score. And so we don't have to do any math until the end. We just keep track of all the pins as we go. And so whether we got a spare or a strike or anything, we don't know until we actually call score and do stuff. So if we go frame by frame at the end when we're calculating the score, and we have a track of all the rolls that we ever got, then we can easily, when we see that we got a spare, count the roll after that twice, or whatever the roll is, because we have all of the rolls and we can see where we are. That's probably what I would do. So I would probably reframe this in terms of frames, which would go from 1 to 10 or 0 to 9, or however you want to do it. And then I would look at 2 rolls at a time. And then depending on if it's a 10 in the first roll, then it's a strike, and then I do 2 things. And if it's a 10 in both rolls, then it's a spare, and I do 1 more thing. Otherwise, I just add them. And I think that would get me there.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that plus 1 more story would be a 1 strike, and then Uncle Bob's final story is a perfect game if you just rolled all strikes. And probably if we handle all those scenarios, we could throw 1 more kind of realistic looking scenario, you know, like a spare in the middle and a strike near the end, just to make sure we have the edge cases. But once we convinced ourselves with enough scenarios that we do bowling correctly, we could ship it, call it done.
So let's talk more about the scenarios and how we write them and who writes them. Yes,
right. Let's go back to 3 Amigos. So this is something, if this were really BDD, we would have spent a lot of time on the 3 Amigos. That's something that we missed today because of the interactivity. But in a real BDD practice, which again is not Cucumber. Cucumber is a thing you can or don't have to do. BDD is the conversation and the understanding before you get into the development. So the way that those scenarios get written is that there are several parties on the team that have an interest in what valuable looks like, what ready looks like, and what done looks like. And we want to incorporate all of those points of view into the story before we waste any effort on it. And so, for example, a product owner has an interest in that. They have perhaps a unique perspective on what valuable is or what done is. A tester might be able to say what done is in their own particular way. And a developer might say whether it's ready to even take the story yet. And you know what condition the code has to be in to be able to say that it's done. So those are three typical parties. If you have business analysts, they are very often involved in this conversation. In my experience, if you have that conversation and you have that agreement, any of the people who are there can write it down. It's not specifically the product owner's job or the tester's job or the developer's job. Maybe you take turns. But the idea is that the story came out of this early and kind of specific conversation, because you've probably had conversations with these parties before, but you might not have had them in terms of a feature with scenarios and a scenario with a given when and then, where imagine you have a programmer in the room who could tell you, that's vague, I don't know how to test that. Or you have a tester in the room saying, I know how to test that, but it's going to be a real headache. And so you can adjust what you're aiming for in the room together before anybody went and wrote code or test. So that's what's different, is that you have this kind of targeted shared language that makes you be specific enough for everybody involved to give a meaningful agreement, not just a shallow agreement, but a deep agreement.
I think you're doing a good job because we're not having many questions coming up.
That might be what that means.
Is that I don't know if you have anything else more, or I can come up with questions for sure.
Well, we have, I guess we have a couple minutes. I just want to reiterate, all of these things are not original to me. Here are some people who are experts. So if you want to know where BDD came from, Dan North is your guy. That was his idea. I believe he was at ThoughtWorks at the time. I don't think so anymore, but you can read his article about what it is and follow him on Twitter. These slides will be sent out if you sign up for my mailing list. I'll give a link to that in a minute. George Dinwiddie, which you can also follow, he has great things to say, did not probably invent the Three Amigos, but definitely popularized it and explained it very well in this article here. Liz Keogh, who is a great explainer of some of these concepts, gives her own take on what BDD is. And then the exercise that we did today. Yeah.
Actually, Dan North says, ask Liz Keogh to explain things that I want to say.
So you see, she's really good at explaining it. And it's always the case that the person who has the idea may not be the best person to share the idea with somebody else. But she really deeply gets it and can really put it in terms for someone else. And then the exercise we did today, which is normally a set of steps that you do with test-driven development in Java or whatever language you have. Uncle Bob wrote that, and we're using that, and you can look at the original here. Couple more things. If you like listening to the sound of my voice and it maybe puts you to sleep, 3 minutes might be short enough that you don't fall asleep. I have a podcast that I make, and I'm starting to have some guests that really is 180 seconds or less per episode. It's scripted pretty tightly. A couple examples here. One about pairing, one about mobbing, and one about what it looks like to care effectively for the people on the team, which is a pretty important prerequisite for BDD to actually work. There's also a book if you prefer to read the essays, because they are essays. And I have a deal for everybody here that it's $4 US today to get the book. It's usually more like 6 or 12 or whatever Leanpub says. So please feel free. I've heard they're very good. I happen to like some of them. And if you would like to have these slides sent to you, like I said, I have a mailing list. It's pretty low volume. It includes talks, podcasts, blog posts, things like that. Just send a message to announce-subscribe at schmans.com, and then it'll give you a confirmation that you have to reply to, and then you're on the list, and in a couple days you'll have these slides. So that's an important one to type in right now. And finally, if you're interested to get some help delivering valuable software, that's something that I do. I'm a consultant, coach, and trainer. I'm based in the New York area, so if you are around there and would like to continue with BDD or anything else, get in touch. If you're in the Toronto area, which I understand many of you are, I'm happy to refer you to people who are experts around there, much more expert than I am. So that's coaching. So announce subscribe at schmans.com to get on that list.
Wonderful.
And that's it.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you for being brave to do this online and live coding. I know it is not easy, and many brave souls have tried, just like you. So I really want to thank you for that. as well as for everything that you showed us and you talked about. Wonderful messages, and I want to thank you also. Due to technical issues at the beginning, I didn't have a chance to say thank you for staying up late at this time. You are in Europe, different time zone, and being with us and sharing your thoughts and your ideas with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I hope it was enjoyable for everybody else here too.
This has been really great. For everyone that is still here, I want to remind you about some of the upcoming events that we have. I'm going to take a little bit I'm going to try to take when I can the presentation. We at Toronto Agile Community, we have a lot of things coming up, more webinars, and we are planning to have our conference coming up soon. Submissions are almost now open. Done. We are in the process of deciding who's gonna be the presenters and who's gonna get into the program. There is a lot of exciting sessions coming. You can go to our website and you can see through the content system what is submitted and probably vote and help us on the selections. So more webinars we plan to bring to you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What are the topics that you would like to discuss coming up? And if you want to stay in touch with us, definitely our website, or subscribe on our newsletter, or follow us on Twitter for any news. And that's where I want to end today. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Amitai, and the recording will be offered soon. Bye.
Thanks again. It was a great time.
Thank you.